Ate plenty of turkey. Still, exactly. It's the gift that keeps on giving. Yeah, I understand. I do. I truly do. We chop things down in our family, and we just do a nice turkey breast instead because it's just the four of us, and so it's a lot easier to do that. But I remember the days of the full bird. Well, we are going to jump into things. We are in the final session for Sabbath. Can you believe it? This is the final session. And I really want to just pull it together in a nice little bow for you. And so we're going to be talking about practical Sabbath in this session. I think probably the biggest roadblock for us is not so much that we don't see the need for Sabbath. If anybody has a brain, they know they want rest. I stand here as a person who's tired today, so I know we need rest, right? There's a lot of activity to life. Life is constantly moving, and sometimes it's moving without our permission. And so I don't think the roadblock or the block for us in general is anything but mental. I actually don't think it's something that we can't wrap ourselves around and kind of halfway agree we need it, but I think the problem that we encounter is we don't know how to get it. Like, what does Sabbath actually look like? We've been talking about the concept of rest and how we need it and how it opens up spiritual avenues and it allows for the unexpected and the miraculous from God. And we've been talking about how desperately our bodies need that tranquility, that serenity, that peace, that repose, all those words that we've defined in our previous sessions. But the question is, with the issue of practicality, how do we take lives and homes and relationships and all of these aspects of our existence that are crammed full and actually practice rest? How do we do it? Because in a lot of cases, I think our lives have run amok ahead of us, and some of these things are now happening quite without our permission. And so how do we reel it back in? And so today as we end, I want to just talk about practical Sabbath, how to actually reel it in, things to think about on 3 different levels. But before we get to that, I want us to read a few passages. The first one is Matthew chapter 11, verses 28 to 30. Matthew 11, 28 to 30. This is something that Jesus said, and I want to put it out there first, because it is a promise of his, and it's also his heartbeat where it concerns you and I. It says this, "Come to me, all you who labor and are heavy laden." Anybody here feel like they're heavy laden? That's the one we deal with the most, because sometimes we're retirees and we don't necessarily have the grind anymore of a 9 to 5. But do you ever still feel the heaviness of responsibility and the things on your mind, the people on your mind, the things that are tearing at you, the things that are concerning you? So those that labor, those that are still physically working, those that are putting in a lot of effort in order to keep the roof over their head, but also those who might be heavier in spirit and in heart, weighed down by things that are just on their mind. Here's what he says, "I will give you rest. Take my yoke upon you and learn from me. For I'm gentle and lowly in heart, and you will find rest for your souls." And there's the real truth. If all of us were at gunpoint and somebody asked us, "Do you need more rest for your soul or your body?" I think all of us would agree in this room, my soul needs more rest, actually. That part of me that encapsulates who I am, what drives me, my mentality, my ideals, my perspectives, my likes, my dislikes, my soul, the thing that makes up your identity as a human being, the real you that lays within there, that makes you unique, that makes you Josie or Renee or Lisa, that aspect of you is probably the part that suffers the most from a lack of rest. Because you can get sleep and not have rest. Because there's plenty of us in this room that have done that for many years. Yeah, I lay my head on the pillow at night, but how many times do you wake up during the night? Or stay, exactly. How late do you finally rest your eyes, because you have things swarming through your brain. He says, "You'll find rest for your souls, for my yoke is easy and my burden is light." Now, I want to actually flip forward just one chapter. Let's go to Matthew chapter 12. because he says that he's the rest. He says that he's the rest for our souls. But I want to see what Jesus actually did on a day of rest, because I think that that would give us some pretty cool indications of how he sees this thing. So Matthew chapter 12. I'm going to actually read 12 verses, so it'll be extended, but I think it's worthwhile. It says this: At that time, Jesus went through the grain fields on the Sabbath, and his disciples were hungry and began to pluck heads of grain and to eat. And when the Pharisees saw it, they said to him, "Look, your disciples are doing what is not lawful to do on the Sabbath." But he said to them, "Have you not read what David did when he was hungry, he and those who were with him? How he entered the house of God and ate the showbread, which was not lawful for him to eat, nor for those who were with him, but only for the priests? Or have you not read in the law that on the Sabbath the priests in the temple profane the Sabbath and are blameless? Yet I say to you that in this place there is one greater than the temple. But if you had known what this means, I desire mercy and not sacrifice, you would not have condemned the guiltless. For the Son of Man is Lord even of the Sabbath." Now when he had departed from there, he went into their synagogue, and behold, there was a man who had a withered hand, and they asked him, saying, "Is it lawful to heal on the Sabbath?" That they might accuse him. Then he said to them, "What man is there among you who has one sheep, and if it falls into a pit on the Sabbath, will not lay hold of it and lift it out? Of how much more value, then, is a man than a sheep? Therefore, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath." Now, they're trying to find an opportunity to accuse him, to say that he's mishandling this concept of rest. And he's like, "I'm literally the Lord of rest. I just said it one chapter ago. I literally said I am the rest. The rest for your souls." He says it twice. He reiterates it. But now he's making a different statement. He's saying it's lawful to do good with your rest, to do good. So we really want to dig into that. I would encourage you, if you're a note taker, jot down Hebrews 4 and read it out, that chapter, a little bit later, because we're pressed for time and trying to fill out something that's quite complex. I'm not going to go through all of it, but I will tell you that Hebrews 4 is significant because it talks about the concept of New Testament rest and how it applies to us as Christians. Now, we know that when it comes down to this wilderness experience that we've been looking at, that unfortunately there were a great number of people, specifically people above a certain age, who were not able to enter the promised land. They died in the wilderness. There were a lot of reasons why they died, but it all boiled down to one simple thing. There was a lack of belief in God's ability to give them safe passage and to help them to conquer a land they were supposed to occupy. This was not the first time the children of Israel had lived in that land. It just had been a long time. They had to flee to Egypt. Joseph opened the door for his family, essentially, by being a person of favor in Egypt and saved them from the famine at the time. But they settled in the area. They got comfortable in Goshen. And 400 plus years later, they are now not just a free people who's supposed to be going to the promised land. What they are a bunch of slaves who have essentially been captured, and they got the sugar in the beginning and the salt came in at the end, basically. They were told they'd be great, everything would be fine, the land is yours. A Pharaoh rises up who has no clue about Joseph, his story, or his people, and doesn't really care. He just sees a threat, possibly, to his power, not even a threat that ever rose up against his power, but he sees the potential for it and enslaves them and traps them, and it changes their entire mentality, and promised land is not something that's in their focus anymore. The idea of ownership, the idea of any of that is not within their concept. They are slaves, they work day to day, they work themselves to the bone, they're beaten on the back, and that's what they know. And so trying to deprogram them in the wilderness was an incredibly difficult thing. The younger people who went out as the spies to take a look at the land and see, could we capture it? They come back full of fervor, full of passion. Yeah, we can absolutely do that. The older, not so much. I don't think so. I don't think this is possible for us. I don't think God can actually do this. This is the real statement. Because it wasn't as if God was asking them to necessarily figure it all out. It's simply, do you believe that God is well able to give you what he said was yours? Now, if Jesus tells you that rest is yours, Do you think he is well able, or are you afflicted with the same condition as the children of Israel, saying, I'm not sure that's possible. I don't think you can conquer my schedule. I don't think you can conquer my priority list. I don't think you can conquer the insanity that is my life. Because if we don't believe that the Lord of the Sabbath is able to reign over us and bring us into a place of rest, then we are no different than those above 40 in the wilderness. And unfortunately for us, we're sometimes going to find ourselves dead in our wilderness, never actually attaining this idea of rest. In Hebrews 4, the author kind of shapes that out, says it's their disobedience in that wilderness that caused them all of that trouble. It's their inability to have faith in God's capacity to do this. And then he shifts the focus. Whoever this writer of Hebrews is, and there's a lot of thoughts about what that might be, but whoever this writer is, he shifts the reader's focus to the New Testament experience in verse 2. And he says this, "For indeed the gospel was preached to us as well as to them. But the word that they heard, it did not profit them, not being mixed with faith in those who heard it. For we who have believed do enter that rest." So the first thing I will say is, before we get to the practical side of Sabbath, do you believe you can have rest? Because they did not. They were sure their lives would always be toil and struggle and somebody keeping them under the thumb. If you are approaching it with that standpoint, you're not going to find Sabbath. You've got to get to a place where your heart really believes, if God has said, this is for me, then it is attainable. It continues on in Hebrews 4, we're encouraged to be diligent in entering. It actually says, be diligent to enter that rest. It's not a passive thing. If you're going to enter into rest, you have to plan for it and you have to allow it to happen. You can't just sit there and wait for it to slap you in the face. Again, remember, we're not going from overdrive to overdrive. It's not about hitting the end of your rope and being exhausted and collapsing in a corner and calling that rest. That's kind of like when we, I've known people who do this. They will literally go through a day and forget to eat, and they're like, retroactively, Lord, it was a fast. Okay, but you're not exactly going to reap the benefits of the thing you didn't declare first and be intentional about. You don't get to look in the rearview mirror and say, oh, that's what that was. No, that's not how it works. You just forgot to eat, my dear. You didn't devote that to the Lord. And can I tell you something? If all you did was collapse at the end of your day because you had nothing left in you, you didn't find rest. You just found overdrive. You found emergency. That's what you found. You found a body that crashed, but that was not rest. Rest is something you have to plan for. Rest is something you have to intentionally seek. Rest is something you have to make room for. Remember, the entire thing that we're doing here is called breathe, making room for Sabbath. When a baby is on the way, you find a place to put that baby when it arrives. And that nursery is prepared, right? And you're buying all the things, all the doodads and the things, right? All the genie, garbage cans and all the things that you got to do. And the bassinet is there, and the walls are painted, and the cool little mobile is there above the baby's resting place. And all that stuff is there. Why? Because you're making room for baby. And you and I also have to make room for God to be able to give us rest. It says in Hebrews 4, you need to diligently enter that rest. It's provided for you. You're also told in Hebrews 4, and it may seem, because we often quote this passage, for the word of God is sharper than any two-edged sword, right? Piercing to the dividing asunder of bone and marrow, soul and spirit. And it understands, it's a discerner of the thoughts and intents of the heart. And we always quote that, but we never quote it in its proper context. It's actually talking about Sabbath. And basically saying, if you think you can avoid it, and give yourself plenty of reasons why you haven't diligently found it, understand that the Word of God understands and sees your intentions, and it knows your disobedience. That's the context of that passage. It's phrased in rest. And so we need to know that God is aware and that the reading of his word becomes a reflection, a mirror that can convict us of the things lying under the surface where we're not giving in to the holiness that is Sabbath. It says, hold fast your confession, or depending on your passage, your particular translation, profession of faith. It's this idea of make sure that as you're seeking that rest, and as you're allowing the Word of God to really dive deep into you and sort out why you do what you do, what your intentions are, what your motivations are, why you're frenetic or why you're lazy, whatever extreme, wherever you are on that spectrum, right? It's basically saying, hold on to the confession of faith. Hold on to your practice and your discipline of spirituality in this process. Because it is meant for your good. It is meant to take you to a place of rest. But in the New Testament, what does it equate that rest to? I'm going to actually read the final verses 14 to 16. Another passage that we often quote, but maybe not in the context of what the author was trying to say with rest. Seeing then that we have a high priest who has passed through the heavens, Jesus the Son of God, let us hold fast our confession, for we do not have a high priest who cannot sympathize with our weaknesses, but was in all points tempted as we are, yet without sin. Let us therefore come boldly to the throne of grace, that we may obtain mercy and find grace in the time of need. Phrased in Sabbath and this idea of finding rest, what it really means is, guys, you and I need grace and mercy because we have weaknesses that are tripping us up, and we act at times just like those children of Israel, wandering in our wilderness, unable to make the connection to the place of rest and authority and ownership. Don't you wish you owned your life and your life didn't own you? Don't you wish you owned your schedule and your schedule didn't own you? Don't you wish you owned a portion of your relationships and could speak into them rather than removing all your boundaries and letting people mow you over? I think we all wish we could have that. And God is literally saying, my grace and my mercy provides that because I know your weakness. I was tempted in every single way when I occupied the same land as you. I've tried to guide people through this concept before. I have given my grace and mercy as a form of rest to you so that you know I'm meeting you every morning and I'm going to make up the difference, and it's not all rolling on you. But I need you to trust me, and I need you to unplug, and I need you to let this happen so I can refresh and renew you and meet you in that place and speak to you and make you familiar with the sound of my voice, give you direction. I can't do that when you're cluttered. Read Hebrews 4 when you can, because I think you'll find it insightful to actually see those two passages, which are, again, are often isolated, but not necessarily in context. When you read the entire thing, I think it will make a lot of sense. So how do we access this grace, this mercy to give us the rest that we need? I'm going to give you 3 different ways that I think it should happen. And this is not exhaustive, but I think it gives us a good start. And it probably will end this series with some actionable steps for us. So let's talk about the first one, and that is spirituality. First of all, remember what the words of Jesus were. He said, it is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. Let me give you the first point. I think we need to find meaningful opportunities in our week to devote time to the practice of doing good. We need the practice of doing good. In the case of Christ, he was bagged by the religious establishment, and he was bagged for making sure that his disciples ate, and a man who was suffering was relieved of his suffering. That's what they tried to bag him on. That was his great fault, apparently. But can I tell you something? We need to look for opportunities to feed and heal as well. And we say to ourselves, how is that rest? How is that rest? Let me build it out. Remember a couple of weeks ago I spoke to you about how it was important, and it was a divine directive of God to the children of Israel that the rest not just be for themselves, but also anyone else that was living in the encampment with them. Every servant, every household member, every family member. We said, God told them, you need to rest yourselves, but you also need to provide rest for other people. Can I tell you something? You would be doing something holy and something good if part of the spiritual rest you give in your week is to do good to provide rest for someone else. Someone who needs feeding, someone who needs healing. And it doesn't have to be something that's really intricate and crazy and complicated. It can be as simple as you recognize the weariness in another soul that's around you, and you go and be an encourager. This time together in this sanctuary is a magnificent moment to practice the art of doing good. It is lawful to do good on the Sabbath. What do we really mean by that? Jesus is essentially saying to them, you've taken the concept of Sabbath and you've skewed it. You don't understand the point of the Sabbath. You don't understand the heart of the Sabbath. You've made a whole bunch of little rules that you've added on top of it to make it more complicated so it's just as full of work as it could possibly be. Because what do you do with your day of rest? You ignore. You ignore the needs around you. You ignore the hunger around you. You ignore the suffering around you. You just pull yourself right out of the equation, and you forget that even in that moment, I can still move. So if you're going to give yourself rest, understand that in that rest, because you're accessing the voice of God, He may speak to you and give you a prime opportunity to minister. When we gather in this room, I can tell you this much. Absolutely. The person who's teaching you adult Sunday school, the person who is preaching to you, they are working on your behalf. They are doing something to feed you. But that does not mean you occupy the pew and gorge yourself and do nothing for anybody else. Sabbath is not just inactivity. Sabbath is about rerouting a mindset, a perspective, and looking outside of yourself while you allow yourself to rest and trust in the grace and mercy of God to sustain you. There is an activity to Sabbath. There is. But I'll tell you this much. I don't know about you, but I'd rather minister for the Lord and do something to feed another person and heal another person than I ever want to spend time in my 9 to 5. I don't know about you, but to me it is far more rewarding to do something in the confines of the rest and peace and practice of doing good for God than doing good for anybody else. I spend the majority of my week lining somebody else's pocket. That's literally what I do. I keep somebody else's business flowing in the right direction, and they profit from it. I would love to be able to say that the best of myself was not given to that the best of myself was given to the house of the Lord and the people of God, and those outside of the fellowship of faith that need to see the light and the love of God. It's lawful to do good. So when you're doing your spiritual practices, make room for that. Practice of doing good would probably be related in the definition of Sabbath to peace. Remember that we said peace is about being in right relationship with God, but also choosing right relationship with people. And so I would say the practice of doing good is actually a practice of peacemaking. If all you are doing is building a bridge so that people can find peace in God and trust in you, you have done an incredible thing that falls into the definition of Sabbath, just as Jesus did when he was here. There's a second thing I would tell you to do under spirituality. I would tell you to find your secret place. Find your secret place. To understand what I mean by that, Matthew 6, verses 6 to 7. Here's what it says. But you, when you pray, go into your room, and when you've shut your door, pray to your Father who is in the secret place. And your Father who sees in secret will reward you openly. In all of the fuss of our weeks, and there's a lot of fuss to our weeks, I think sometimes we fail to find a secret place. What do I mean by that? A place of complete intimacy and privacy where you can sit in the presence of God and it's just you and Him. In all the rush, what often happens, and I'm sure people in this room have experienced it, have you ever had it happen that you are so worn out that when you finally can have a moment to crack open your Bible, the eyelids start getting heavy? Or the moment you actually can pray and it's somewhat quiet, your mind starts worrying in a different direction, and you find that your prayers are no longer following a proper route. And they're becoming sort of diffused in a bunch of directions, or you're even leaning into vain repetition because you can't concentrate on what to say. I think a lot of us feel that, and I think a lot of us experience that, and I think the reason that happens is because we are not able to effectively find a secret place that's meaningful where we're super present with God, because we don't make room for it. A lot of times I think we try to find spots of moments here and there, but we don't intentionally make room for it. And it might be a good practice for us to decide that there is a sacred time in our schedule, and nothing touches that. Short of some crazy emergency where somebody's lopped off their leg, nothing touches that. That is my time. That's where I go into my closet, so to speak. That's where I go into the secret place. I go into, in that place, it's this idea, when it speaks of the closet, it's this idea of I find an area that's separated out from everyone else in their noise. Maybe for you, I know for me, this was actually a great thing for me, a great practice, especially when I was on the East Coast. I used to take on clients and do bookkeeping for nonprofits, and sometimes I had to travel. And in traveling, that became my closet. It was a mobile closet, but it was a closet nonetheless, because what I would do is I would get in that car, and I would shut that door, and I would turn off everything. No music. Just the Lord and I. And I would just drive and talk to Him. And there was something really sacred about that moment for me, because I didn't have the conversation of other people. I didn't have anything. I had a long highway that was relatively dead, so I didn't have to divide my attention terribly. And it was me and it was God. And there were times I sobbed in that car. There were times I felt the presence of God like He was sitting in the passenger seat next to me. I literally had those moments because I had carved out a space without distraction. Really, the secret place is carving out a place where you can find your discipline and your devotion without the distraction of other stuff. It may mean you need to leave your home, because sometimes the home is not the place. You know what I'm saying? Sometimes our homes are not the place. Sometimes our homes are dead set against it because we have interference and other considerations that are happening there. Maybe it's a lopsided home when it comes down to spirituality, and the people you live with don't necessarily espouse the same belief. Maybe that's what it is. Maybe you find that when you're in your home, that's not a sacred or secret place, and that's okay. Maybe you need to just take a walk in the morning. Maybe that's what you got to do. Maybe you have to get out of your house and take a walk. Maybe you need to go somewhere else. Maybe you need to take your car and park it in the middle of nothingness and make that a secret place. But find it for yourself and for your sanity. Both spiritually and naturally, you need quiet. And you need to be able to talk to God without interruption. You need it, and so do I. We need it. Our souls crave it. In spirituality, remember to do good and find your secret place. Let's talk about humanity, because that would be the next area where I think we can take some actionable steps. The first thing I think we need to do, and this can be hard, but I think we need to leave spans of time that are completely unplanned. Leviticus 25, God told the people that the farming land itself needed Sabbath. It needed to rest. And one of the things that he said is that there would be a specific year that would come in a cycle. And in that year, whatever grew naturally from the land, untilled and unfussed with, is what they would use to sustain themselves. I think it's important to allow some time for spontaneity, to just get up and go. I think we need time for the spontaneity of a good old-fashioned nap. I think we need time to kick back with a book and your favorite mug filled with a nice hot coffee or tea, whatever your preference is, and just let it happen. The truth is that we pack our schedule with so many planned things, and these obligations, this clutter of the calendar, quite honestly, does not put margins around our schedule for the unplanned. You need to give yourself the opportunity to wake up one morning and not have anything on your agenda. I need it too. Believe me, I need it. And it's okay to have the unplanned. It's actually okay because it's a form of rest to your calendar. It's a form of rest to your mind to say nothing is pulling at me right now. So my day can be a day that is fashioned simply by the spontaneous and the hand of God. Just like that land that's told, the people are told, don't touch it. Don't mess with it. Leave it alone. Whatever happens, happens. If something springs up from that land naturally, eat it. And that's it. So can I tell you, here's your equivalent. Ready? This is the great spiritual revelation. Wake up that morning and whatever's in your fridge, eat it. Okay. But seriously, it's this idea of just don't feel like your schedule has to be planned within an inch of its life. That's one thing. Based on my personality type, I've always been surrounded by people who need to know exactly what we're doing right now. Like, tell me what the plan is, and I'm sort of like, I'm not really a person given to planning. Like, I'm a person who just kind of goes with it. That's my natural thing. If I have to plan, it's usually a foreign thing, and I'm doing it because I have to, but it's not really something that I enjoy doing. And so let me just say to all of you whose blood pumps harder than mine in this regard, give yourself a chill day in the modern vernacular. Just give yourself a chill day, a day where you just don't have to feel like everything is about productivity. Because that's really where that comes from. That comes from a slave mentality that says, if I'm not producing, I'm not meaningful. If I'm not doing something right now with every inch of my time, then I'm not actually redeeming the time, and God is angry at me. I'm wasting. And God's sort of like, rest. It's okay. You actually need this every so often. For the good of your mind and your body and your health, you actually need this every so often. You don't have to burn this candle at both ends, and you don't have to be this rigid. There are moments when I need you to be a Mary. Remember we talked about that, and sit at my feet a little while. Yeah, okay, Martha has a plan. That's cool. That's great. But everybody will eventually eat, and we could have actually worked together to make that meal. But right now, it's about relaxing, sitting at my feet, and just letting things happen naturally, organically. There's a second thing that I think we need. And this may be a new term for us, but I think it's a very necessary one. I think we need to expand our worlds and our minds and even our social spheres with avocational time. Avocational. So you've heard of vocational, right? That's the thing that you're learning how to do, the skill set that you possess, the skill set that you've poured yourself into because it's something that you derive an income from. It's the thing you know how to do. Maybe you went to school for it. Maybe you just got experience training under somebody. Maybe your time was just acquired through your skill was acquired through a mentor who poured into you. Whatever it was. Your vocational time is the time that you devote to the skill set that you get your income from. Avocational time is the time that you have spent learning a skill because it's just interesting to you and nothing more. That's okay. It may come in the form of hobbies. It's something that brings you joy. It's a joy giver in your life. It's something, however, that still keeps your brain moving. Maybe for you, I mean, there may be some people who knows how to knit in here. Anybody know how to knit? I have not learned how to knit. I don't do the knitting thing. Okay, fine. Who in here likes doing carpentry, but just for the fun of it? Oh, okay. Fishers, hunters? Yeah, all right, I went back to my Idaho stuff. All right, but truly, for our hunters and our fishers in here, or our people who enjoy, firing off things that make loud bangs, for all of those people, right, you had to learn that skill set. You had to learn how to do that, but it's something that brings your blood pressure down if you allow it to. It's that thing that you just enjoy. It feeds your mind. It feeds your interests. It puts a smile on your face. Whatever that hobby is, I think it's an important part of rest to let yourself do something where there are no stakes in it. Because we live a high-stake life. And you never know if the very thing that you do to bring that blood pressure down, that hobby, that interest of yours, you never know if that's going to connect you to another person who needs the Lord. And it might open up an opportunity in your Sabbath to heal and to feed. The thing is that we don't always give ourselves that time because, again, those small pleasures and those enjoyments, I think at times we feel guilty about them because we say, I don't have time to treat myself to doing something that's not going to benefit the family, that's not going to benefit my finances, that's not going to benefit blah, 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 insert whatever it is. And can I tell you, you need it for your sanity to do something that just benefits you. And that is okay. As long as all things are done in moderation and balanced, that's okay. There's a third thing for humanity. I think we also need to enjoy natural or created beauty. It says in the scripture, the heavens declare the handiwork of the Lord. And in the order of creation, when God was basically progressing through all of those days, he always made a declaration at the end of each of those days that whatever it was he had created was good. He looked at it, he enjoyed it, he took pleasure in it, and he declared it good. So you know what? You and I should do exactly the same. As part of our rest, I think that we should take a stroll. Get ourselves out in nature. Enjoy an outdoor pastime if you're one of those people. You're not going to see me on skates or skis or, God forbid, going up a ski lift. You're not going to see that in me. That will not be a joy giver for me, but that's all right. There are other joy givers that I do, and I do take pleasure in, and one of those for me is actually, and it's kind of hard to do right here, but water gazing. I love sitting by water. I love sitting by water, ocean, and some of the most powerful moments that I've had with myself and with God have been when I just drove my car to the edge of the ocean and sat there and stared out at it and watched. Let me tell you something. When you watch that ocean push out and push back in, and push out and push back in, I can't tell you how many times God used that moment to say, I'm still in control. And you may feel like you're being pushed out, but I'll pull you back in. And those were moments for me. And all I did was just sit there, listen to the cawing of amazing birds on the Cape, and just kind of be. Sometimes you need to just be. Get yourself out of your house and just be. Stargaze. When's the last time, we spend so much time staring down at all the things we have to do. When's the last time any one of us just walked out in the middle of the night and just stood there and looked up? Good. You found some rest. But seriously, I mean that. Sometimes you need to just stand there and look up and stare at the vastness of it, knowing that God is in control, that he made it, and you're supposed to look at it. Everything that he made for you and me. He literally made it so that we could enjoy it. And we spend so many times pushing around bits of paper and gathering money and fixing pipes and calming crying children. And he's sort of like, take a step out of your house, please, and breathe some air. I literally put it there, and you're not breathing. Because we're all wound up. all the time. I think sometimes we need to just go and listen to that beautiful piece of music or sit and watch somebody perform a beautiful story on a stage. Like, do it. Enjoy some natural and created beauty. It's okay. I think we also need to nurture and cultivate our relationships. And that's another aspect of our humanity. We need to set aside time for our spouses, our children, our grandchildren, and we need to pay full attention, which means put down the phone. Put down the phone. Get a little basket and all the phones going, and I don't care what you do, but put down the phone and actually listen to the person in front of you. Listen to them. Because we need to replenish and nourish ourselves and the people we love. Because that's a practice of Sabbath, to spend time. Go hug your cat. Okay? I do it. It brings my blood pressure down. It really does. I sit there and I'll hug the cat. Just come on over here, Louie. I think even the strongest of introverts needs affirmation. I think even the strongest of us introverts need to have a sense of being known that only comes through close bonds and meaningful conversations. So can I tell you that this is a two-parter? Make friends. Because you need laughter, and you need shared experiences, and you need people to vent to, and you need the practice of trust. And that will give rest to you and get your mind outside of yourself. Finally, stewardship. We need to, number one, live in God's economy. What do I mean by that? Well, what difference would it make if you began thinking of reducing your spending, not as tightening your belt or cheaping out or sacrificing, but instead as attempting to relieve your own strain so that you have opportunities to bless yourself and others? Because let me tell you something, whatever you and I obligate ourselves to, we have to work that much to meet the obligation. So if we created a ton of debts in our lives, we now have to work to pay off those debts. And sometimes us being ruled by our poor stewardship is the reason we are not giving ourselves rest. The more in debt you become, the more you open yourself to stress, to overworking, to missing opportunities with your family, with yourself, with God, and in God's house. How many people work on Sundays because they feel they have to take it, because they overextended themselves? When you make money, and your home. Number 3, sow into your future. And number 4, sow into experiences and making memories. And then you know what you do? Figure out ways to be able to reduce the extraneous that may not be necessary and work on your debt so that you can funnel yourself into those 4 priorities more than you're funneling yourself into paying for things that you didn't actually need. These are things you need. You need to make sure your family eats, there's a roof over your head, you're blessing the kingdom of God, and you're doing some things towards your future and towards making memories with your family. Everything outside of that, for status, for pressure, for luxuries that are not necessary and only rope you in for a house that's bigger than what you need, all of those things end up destroying your rest later. So tie yourself into God's economy. And then the last one, you need Sabbath for your personal health. I've been on a journey, my husband and I, this year, learning this for ourselves in greater portion. Ray Ortlund, he says this, he says, what sets us as Christians apart is this: we rest in order to work. We do not work in order to allow ourselves rest. Now, I need us to wrap our heads around that, because a lot of us, the only reason our sleep cycle even exists is because we are juicing ourselves up to wake up in the morning and do it all over again. The truth is, you rest, and you will have the capacity to be able to get your responsibilities done. But you don't treat rest as the gift you give yourself because you were super productive. That's the wrong direction. When the Jews of old spoke of the day, they spoke of evening and morning, not morning and evening as we do. We start our days with production in our minds and end it with the gift of rest if we produced well. And they started it with, we rest, and then we allow the Lord to give us the strength so that we can do what we need to do. There's a difference. And so I'll say this. You know what our bodies need? They need sleep. They need proper nutrition. They need hydration. They need some vitamins, maybe some supplements. They need some sunlight. I'm being serious here. We don't give ourselves these things and our health suffers. We need exercise. Can I say something to the ladies, especially? You need appropriate clothing and shoes. Stop treating your joints so poorly and deforming your bones for fashion. I'm serious. Because 30 years down the line, when you're completely arthritic, you're going to wonder why you did that to yourself. I gave up high-heeled shoes 20 years ago. I was still in my 20s when I gave them up because I was already starting to suffer. So let me just tell you, you need to do things for your body. You need to stay warm when it's cold and cool when it's hot. You need proper hygiene. Take care of your skin, your hair, your nails. Do this. Because your body is a temple. And if it's a temple, then that makes it a sacred place, devoted and literally housing, if you're full of the Spirit, the presence of God. How do we treat a temple? With respect and with honor, understanding that a temple is a place where the divine meets the natural. I'll end with this scripture for the series, Isaiah 30 and 15. For thus said the Lord God, the Holy One of Israel, in returning and rest you shall be saved. In quietness and in trust shall be your strength. You and I need this. We have to start giving ourselves it. Thank you so much for hanging with me as we went through this idea of Sabbath. And we are going to start a new series next week, and I'll drop what that is midweek so that you know what to look forward to. I appreciate all of you.